Life in our quiet suburb of Springdale was about as ordinary as it gets. My name's Mike Johnson, a 45-year-old insurance agent, husband, and father of two. Springdale's the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, lawns are meticulously maintained, and neighborhood barbecues are the norm. My wife Lisa and I had been married for 20 years. Lisa was the life of every party, her laughter echoing through the rooms, a stark contrast to my more reserved nature. Our kids, Emily and Jake, were both in high school, navigating the treacherous waters of adolescence. We lived in a 2-story house on Maple Street, a picturesque home with a white picket fence and a lush garden that Lisa tended to with unyielding passion. I always thought we had the perfect life. Our relationship wasn't perfect. Whose is? But I thought we were solid. I thought we understood each other. We had our routines, our shared jokes, and our dreams for the future. It was a Saturday morning when I first noticed something was off. I was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping my coffee and reading the news on my tablet. Lisa was in the garden, as usual, her fingers working through the soil with a practiced ease. But there was something different about her that day. She seemed distracted, her movements less fluid, more hurried. At first, I chalked it up to nothing. Maybe she had a lot on her mind. After all, Emily was preparing for college applications, and Jake had just joined the soccer team, keeping us all busy with practices and games. But as the days went by, my unease grew. Little things started to add up, painting a picture I was reluctant to see. And that's where our story begins. In the heart of Springdale, in a house that seemed perfect from the outside, a storm was brewing. A storm that would shatter everything I thought I knew about my wife, my family, and myself. It started with the late nights. Lisa had always been dedicated to her job as a real estate agent, but recently, her workload seemed to double. She'd come home late, often after the kids had gone to bed. Her excuses varied, but always plausible. "The housing market's booming, Mike. I've got clients lining up," she'd say with a weary smile. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But something gnawed at the back of my mind. One evening, she came home well past midnight, her eyes red-rimmed, and her clothes slightly disheveled. I was waiting for her in the living room, pretending to be engrossed in a late-night show. "Tough day?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. "You have no idea," she sighed, kicking off her heels and collapsing onto the couch beside me. "Clients are so demanding these days." I nodded, offering her a glass of wine. As she took a sip, I noticed a faint trace of lipstick on the collar of her blouse, a color she didn't wear. My heart skipped a beat, but I swallowed my suspicions. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe she tried a new shade or borrowed a friend's. But then there were the phone calls. She started taking them in another room, her voice hushed, her laughter too forced. Whenever I asked who it was, she'd brush it off. "Just work stuff, Mike. Nothing for you to worry about." I tried to push the doubts aside, but they kept resurfacing. One night, as she was talking in the kitchen, I crept closer, trying to catch a snippet of the conversation. Her tone was intimate, her words laced with a softness she rarely used with me anymore. My stomach churned as I heard her say, "I can't wait to see you again." The next morning I decided to confront her, albeit indirectly. "Lisa, you've been working so hard lately. Why don't we take a weekend off, just the two of us?" She looked at me surprised. "Mike, I'd love to, but I have so many clients depending on me right now. Maybe next month?" I forced a smile, my heart sinking. "Sure, next month then." A week later, while doing laundry, I found a receipt in her jeans pocket. It was from a fancy restaurant across town, dated from one of her late nights. The amount was too high for a solo meal, and the time stamped was 10 p.m. My mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. Then came the social media posts. Lisa had always been active on Instagram, sharing moments from her day, mostly about our garden or her job. But lately there were photos of elegant dinners, scenic views from places she'd never mentioned visiting. And in some of them, a shadowy figure appeared at the edge of the frame. It was never clear enough to identify, but it was unmistakably a man. I tried to talk myself out of my growing paranoia. Maybe I was being ridiculous. Maybe she was just stressed and needed an outlet. But every day, my suspicions grew stronger, my trust in her weakening. It was during one of these nights, as I lay awake in bed beside her, listening to her soft breathing, that I decided to do something about it. I needed to know the truth, no matter how much it might hurt, because if there was one thing I couldn't stand, it was living a lie. And so, the next morning, with a heavy heart and a gnawing sense of dread, I began my quest for answers. Little did I know, the truth was far worse than I could have imagined. It started with her phone. I knew it was a breach of trust, but at this point I felt justified. One evening, Lisa was taking a long shower, and I saw her phone lying on the kitchen counter. My hands trembled as I picked it up, praying I wouldn't find anything. But the moment I unlocked it, my heart sank. There were messages from a contact saved as Emily's mom. I knew it wasn't her because Emily's mom and Lisa weren't even that close. I opened the chat, and my world crumbled. The texts were explicit, filled with details of their rendezvous, plans for future meetings, and declarations of love. My Lisa, my wife of 20 years, was having an affair. The name attached to the messages was Brad, a name I vaguely remembered from a barbecue we had attended months ago. He was one of Lisa's clients, a charming, smooth-talking man in his early 40s, the kind of guy you'd instantly dislike for no particular reason other than the air of arrogance he carried. Now I had a reason. The texts were painful to read, but I couldn't stop. My eyes darted over phrases like, "Last night was amazing," and "I can't wait to see you again." There were even photos, selfies of them together, laughing and holding each other in places I recognized, places Lisa had told me she was showing to clients. The betrayal stung, each message a knife to my heart. I needed to be sure, though. Confronting her without solid proof would just give her a chance to lie her way out, so I decided to follow her. The next day, she told me she had a late showing and wouldn't be back until late. I nodded, forcing a smile, and told her to take care. As soon as she left, I grabbed my car keys and followed her. She drove across town, stopping at a hotel. I parked a few spots away, my heart pounding in my chest as I watched her walk inside. 15 minutes later, Brad walked in too. My blood boiled as I saw them embrace in the lobby, her head resting on his shoulder, his hand sliding down her back. I waited outside, the minutes stretching into hours. Finally, they emerged, disheveled and laughing, their faces flushed with the afterglow of sex. It was undeniable now. I took pictures, my hands shaking, but I needed the evidence. For the kids, for the divorce, for my own sanity. When they finally parted ways, Lisa heading home and Brad driving off in the opposite direction, I sat in my car, numb. I had the proof I needed, but it felt like my world had collapsed around me. 20 years of marriage, of love, of trust, reduced to nothing by her betrayal. I drove home, my mind racing with anger and heartbreak. I needed to confront her, to hear her admit it, to understand why she did this to us. But I knew I had to be careful. Lisa was cunning and manipulative when cornered. I needed a plan. That night, as she slipped into bed beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. Tomorrow, I would confront her. Tomorrow, I would demand answers. But tonight, I would gather my strength for the storm that was about to hit our home. The next morning, I woke up with a steely resolve. Lisa was already up, humming to herself in the kitchen as she prepared breakfast. The normalcy of the scene almost made me falter. Almost. I walked in and took a seat at the table, watching her every move. "Morning, Mike," she said cheerfully, turning to give me a peck on the cheek. It took every ounce of self-control not to recoil. "Morning," I replied, my voice strained. I needed to do this right, to catch her off guard. I waited until the kids had left for school, the house empty except for us. "Lisa, we need to talk," I said, my tone leaving no room for argument. She looked at me, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. "Sure, what about?" She sat down across from me, her expression turning serious. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding in my chest. "I know about Brad," I said, watching her reaction closely. Her face went pale, her eyes widening in shock. What? What are you talking about?" she stammered, but the guilt was written all over her face. "Don't lie to me, Lisa. I saw the messages. I followed you to the hotel. I know everything," I said, my voice shaking with anger. She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "Mike, I can explain," she finally managed to say. "Explain? Explain what? How you've been cheating on me with that scumbag for who knows how long. How you've lied to me, to our kids." Go ahead, Lisa, I'm all ears. I spat, the fury rising inside me. Tears welled up in her eyes, but I felt no sympathy. She had brought this upon herself. It wasn't supposed to happen, she said, her voice breaking. It just did. We were spending a lot of time together because of the house showings, and one thing led to another. Spare me the details, I snapped. How long has this been going on? She hesitated, looking down at her hands. 6 months, she whispered. It started 6 months ago. 6 months. Half a year of lies and deceit. My hands clenched into fists. Why, Lisa? Why did you do this to us? She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. I don't know, Mike. I was unhappy. You were always busy with work, and I felt neglected. Brad made me feel alive again. Alive? I echoed, my voice rising. You destroyed our family for a cheap thrill, for some fleeting feeling of excitement. She sobbed, burying her face in her hands. I'm sorry, Mike. I never meant for it to go this far. Sorry? I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. Sorry doesn't cut it, Lisa. You broke my trust, our kids' trust. How am I supposed to forgive you for that? She looked up at me, her eyes pleading. Please, Mike, we can work through this. We can go to counseling, try to fix our marriage. I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. Fix our marriage? You really think that's possible after what you've done? She reached out, trying to take my hand, but I pulled away. I love you, Mike. I don't want to lose you. Love? You call this love? I shook my head, disgusted. You know what, Lisa? I think it's time for you to leave. Her eyes widened in horror. Leave? Mike, no, please. Let's talk about this. There's nothing left to talk about, I said coldly. Pack your things and get out. She sobbed harder, but I turned away, unable to look at her anymore. I hope it was worth it, Lisa. I really do. As I walked out of the kitchen, her cries echoing behind me, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Anger, hurt, betrayal, but also a sense of relief. The truth was out, and now I could begin to pick up the pieces of my shattered life. Without her. Lisa didn't leave immediately. She begged and pleaded, saying she needed time to find a place, to explain things to the kids. I relented, not for her sake, but for Emily and Jake. They deserved to hear this from us, together. But my anger was a storm brewing inside me, and I needed an outlet. I decided to take matters into my own hands. Brad had to face the consequences of his actions, too. I knew where he lived. Lisa had mentioned it in passing during one of her real estate stories. He had a flashy condo downtown, the kind of place you'd expect a sleazeball like him to have. That Friday, after work, I drove over there. I waited in my car, my mind racing with thoughts of how to confront him. I needed to do something that would leave a mark, something that would make him regret ever touching my wife. As I sat there, a plan formed in my mind. Brad came home around 7 p.m. I watched as he sauntered up to his building, smug and oblivious. I followed him inside, blending in with a group of residents. He took the elevator up, and I waited a few minutes before following. When I reached his floor, I waited for the hallway to clear before knocking on his door. He opened it, surprised to see me. Mike, right? Lisa's husband? He said, his expression shifting from confusion to unease. That's right, I said, stepping forward, forcing him to let me in. He backed up, sensing the confrontation was imminent. Look, Mike, I know you're upset, he started, but I cut him off. Upset? That's an understatement, I snarled. You fucked my wife, Brad, for 6 months. Did you think I wouldn't find out? He paled, holding up his hands in a placating gesture. Mike, listen, it wasn't personal. It just happened. We didn't mean for it to go this far. Oh, it went far enough, I said, my voice low and menacing. Now you're going to pay for it. I lunged at him, my fist connecting with his jaw. He stumbled back, crashing into a table, sending a lamp toppling over. He tried to fight back, but I was fueled by months of pent-up rage and betrayal. I landed another punch, this one to his gut, doubling him over. You think you can just take what isn't yours? I shouted, grabbing him by the collar and slamming him against the wall. You think you can destroy my family and walk away unscathed? Mike, please. I'm sorry, he gasped, blood trickling from his split lip. I never meant to hurt you. Too late for apologies, I spat, throwing him to the floor. You're going to pay for this, Brad, one way or another. I looked around his condo, my eyes landing on his prized possessions, the expensive electronics, the designer furniture, the framed photos of his lavish lifestyle. I grabbed a chair and smashed it against his flat-screen TV, the screen shattering into a million pieces. I kicked over his coffee table, scattering magazines and remote controls. Brad lay on the floor, groaning in pain, too stunned to move. "I want you to remember this, Brad," I said, standing over him. "Every time you look at this mess, I want you to remember what you did, and I want you to know that this is just the beginning." I left him there, broken and bleeding, his condo in shambles. As I drove home, a twisted sense of satisfaction settled over me. It wasn't enough to heal the wounds Lisa's betrayal had inflicted, but it was a start. A small measure of justice in a world that had been turned upside down. When I got home, Lisa was waiting for me, her eyes red from crying. "Where have you been?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Taking care of business," I said coldly, brushing past her. "Pack your things, Lisa. I meant what I said. You're leaving." She didn't argue this time. She knew it was over. And as I watched her pack her bags, a sense of finality washed over me. The woman I had loved, the life we had built together, was gone. But at least I had made Brad pay, and that, for now, was enough. Lisa took her time packing. Each minute felt like an eternity as I watched her move from room to room, her eyes lingering on the memories we had built together. Emily and Jake were due home soon, and I dreaded the conversation we had to have with them. They deserved to know the truth, but how could I explain this mess to them? Finally, with her bags packed and set by the front door, Lisa turned to face me. Her eyes were swollen from crying, her face a mask of despair. "Mike, please," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can we talk? One last time?" I nodded, my heart heavy. We moved to the living room, sitting across from each other. The silence between us was thick, the weight of unspoken words hanging in the air. "I'm sorry, Mike," she said, her voice cracking. "I never meant to hurt you or the kids. I was stupid and selfish. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need you to understand that I still love you." I shook my head, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "Love? How can you say that after everything you've done?" She looked down, tears falling onto her lap. "I know it sounds hollow, but it's true. I lost my way, Mike. I let myself get swept up in something I didn't understand. But it doesn't mean I didn't love you. I just felt so alone." "Alone?" I echoed, anger flaring up again. "You think you're the only one who felt lonely? I've been here working hard to provide for our family, trying to make things work. And you repay me by screwing another man?" "I know," she sobbed. "I know I can't take it back. But please, Mike, don't let this destroy everything. We can try to fix it. For the kids, if nothing else." The mention of Emily and Jake brought a fresh wave of pain. "How do you expect me to look them in the eyes and tell them that their mother betrayed us? How do you expect me to trust you again?" She reached out, her hand trembling. "We can go to counseling. We can work on our issues. Just give us a chance." I pulled away, standing up to put some distance between us. "I can't do that, Lisa. I can't pretend that everything's fine when it's not. You've broken something inside me that can't be fixed with a few therapy sessions." She nodded, wiping her tears away. "I understand. I don't expect you to forgive me right away. But please, don't make any rash decisions about the kids. They need both of us." I sighed, the weight of the situation pressing down on me. "I'll always be their father, Lisa. But as for us, I don't see a way back from this. Maybe with time, things will change. But right now, I need you to go." She stood up, her shoulders slumped in defeat. "I'll find a place to stay. I'll be here for the kids whenever they need me." As she reached the door, she turned back one last time. "Mike, I know you hate me right now, but I hope someday you can find it in your heart to forgive me." I said nothing, watching her walk out of our home, the door closing softly behind her. The silence that followed was deafening, the emptiness of the house a stark reminder of the betrayal that had torn us apart. A few minutes later, Emily and Jake came home. I gathered them in the living room, bracing myself for the hardest conversation of my life. "Kids, we need to talk," I began, my voice shaking. "Your mom and we're going through a rough time. There's something you need to know." As I explained the situation, Their faces went from confusion to shock to tears. Emily stormed out of the room, while Jake sat there silent and stunned. I wanted to hold them, to make it all better, but I knew there was no easy fix for this. That night, the house felt colder, emptier. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying the events of the day. Lisa was gone, but the pain remained. It would take a long time to heal if it ever did, but for now, all I could do was take it one day at a time, for my kids and for myself. The days that followed were a blur of legal paperwork, difficult conversations, and raw emotions. Lisa found a small apartment nearby and was trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy for Emily and Jake. We agreed to share custody, but the kids were struggling to adjust to this new reality. Our divorce proceedings began in earnest, and it quickly became clear that this would be a drawn-out battle. Lisa's infidelity had turned what could have been an amicable separation into a contentious fight. Our lawyers exchanged heated emails, and each meeting felt like a war of attrition. The day of the trial arrived, and the courtroom was a cold, sterile place. Lisa and I sat on opposite sides, our lawyers beside us, the tension palpable. Emily and Jake were staying with my sister, away from the painful spectacle. I glanced over at Lisa, who looked worn and defeated. Despite everything, seeing her like that tugged at something inside me, but I quickly pushed it aside. This wasn't about pity, it was about justice and closure. The judge, a stern woman with an air of authority, called the court to order. My lawyer, Mark, presented our case, outlining the infidelity and the emotional damage it had caused. He brought out the photos I had taken of Lisa and Brad, the explicit text messages, the receipts from their secret meetings. Each piece of evidence was a dagger, cutting through the remnants of our marriage. Lisa's lawyer tried to counter, painting a picture of a lonely woman neglected by her husband. He argued that her actions, while regrettable, were a result of my own shortcomings. I clenched my fists, anger boiling beneath the surface. How dare they twist this to make it my fault? The judge listened carefully, her expression unreadable. When it was Lisa's turn to speak, she stood up, her voice trembling. "Your Honor, I made a terrible mistake, I know that. But I love my children, and I want to be a part of their lives. Mike was a good husband, but we drifted apart. I was wrong to seek comfort elsewhere. But please, don't take my kids away from me." I felt a pang of sadness at her words, but I couldn't let it sway me. This was about more than just our relationship. It was about the future of our children. I stood up, my voice steady but filled with emotion. "Your Honor, I was blindsided by Lisa's betrayal. It shattered our family and broke my trust. I want what's best for Emily and Jake, and right now that means stability. I don't want to cut Lisa out of their lives, but I need to protect them from further pain." After hours of testimony and arguments, the judge called a recess to review the evidence. The waiting was agonizing, each minute stretching into eternity. When she finally returned, the courtroom fell silent, everyone hanging on her words. "After careful consideration, I've reached a decision," she began, her gaze shifting between Lisa and me. "Infidelity has clearly caused significant harm in this case. However, both parents have expressed a deep love for their children and a desire to be involved in their lives. Therefore, I am granting primary custody to Mr. Johnson, with Mrs. Johnson receiving visitation rights. I encourage both parties to seek counseling and work towards a cooperative co-parenting relationship for the sake of their children." The gavel came down with a resounding thud, signaling the end of the trial. Relief washed over me, but it was tinged with a bittersweet sadness. This victory came at a high cost. Lisa looked crushed, but she nodded, accepting the judge's decision with quiet resignation. As we left the courtroom, Mark patted me on the back. "You did well, Mike. This is the best outcome you could have hoped for." I nodded, grateful for his support, but my mind was already on the next steps. I had won the legal battle, but the emotional war was far from over. I had to find a way to heal, to rebuild my life and help my children navigate this new, fractured reality. And somehow, I had to do it with Lisa still in the picture, as their mother, if not my wife. The weeks following the trial were a blur of adjustment and healing. Emily and Jake were initially quiet and withdrawn, struggling to come to terms with the new normal. I did my best to be there for them, to reassure them that despite the changes, we were still a family. Lisa kept to the visitation schedule, trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy for the kids. Every time she came to pick them up or drop them off, there was a tension between us, a palpable reminder of the betrayal and the fallout. But for the sake of Emily and Jake, we kept things civil. I threw myself into work, finding solace in the routine and the distraction it provided. My colleagues were supportive, offering words of encouragement and understanding. I confided in a few close friends, sharing my story and drawing strength from their empathy. But the nights were the hardest. The silence of the house, the emptiness of the bed, the absence of Lisa's presence, all of it weighed heavily on me. I often found myself lying awake, replaying the events in my mind, wondering if there had been something I could have done differently, something that could have prevented the unraveling of my marriage. Counseling became a lifeline. I attended sessions with a therapist who helped me navigate the complex emotions I was experiencing: anger, hurt, betrayal, and sadness. Each emotion was dissected, examined, and gradually understood. The process was painful, but it was also necessary. Through counseling, I learned to forgive myself for any perceived shortcomings, and to begin the slow journey of forgiving Lisa, not for her sake, but for my own peace of mind. One day, while cleaning out the garage, I found an old box of photos and mementos from happier times. There were pictures of our wedding day, vacations with the kids, and candid moments of joy that seemed like a lifetime ago. As I sifted through the memories, I felt a mixture of nostalgia and sorrow. But instead of dwelling on the pain, I decided to focus on the positive. These were moments of genuine happiness, and they were a part of my story, no matter how things had ended. Slowly, I started to reclaim my life. I took up hobbies I had neglected over the years: gardening, woodworking, and even painting. These activities became therapeutic, giving me a sense of purpose and accomplishment. I also reconnected with old friends, strengthening bonds that had been neglected during the tumultuous years of my marriage. Emily and Jake began to adjust as well. Emily threw herself into her college applications and extracurricular activities, finding solace in her friends and her future plans. Jake excelled in soccer, his teammates and coach providing a supportive environment. We talked openly about our feelings, creating a safe space where they could express their anger, confusion, and sadness without judgment. Lisa and I continued to co-parent, navigating the complexities of our new relationship. We attended a few joint counseling sessions to improve our communication and to ensure we were both focused on the well-being of our children. Over time, the hostility between us softened, replaced by a tentative understanding. While we would never be the same, we found a way to coexist for the sake of our kids. Months turned into a year, and life gradually found a new rhythm. The scars of the past remained, but they were no longer raw wounds. They were reminders of a painful chapter that had shaped me, taught me, and ultimately made me stronger. One sunny afternoon, as I tended to the garden, Jake came running up to me, a wide grin on his face. "Dad, come see! Emily got accepted into her top college." I followed him inside, where Emily stood, clutching an acceptance letter, her eyes sparkling with excitement. I hugged her tightly, pride swelling in my chest. "I knew you could do it, kiddo. I'm so proud of you." That evening, we celebrated with a homemade dinner and laughter that filled the house, a stark contrast to the silence that had once pervaded it. As I looked around the table at my children, I felt a sense of hope and contentment. We had weathered the storm, and though the journey had been painful, we had come out stronger on the other side. The future was uncertain, but I was no longer afraid. I had learned to trust in myself, to find strength in adversity, and to cherish the moments of joy amidst the chaos. Life had given me a second chance, and I was determined to make the most of it. With a deep breath, I stepped into my new life, ready to embrace whatever came next.